Hello, my name is Katie Freeman, and I am your host of the Maker Mom podcast and this weekly Wonder Woman segment. This week's Wonder Woman segment is with Eleanor Dewey, who is a wood turner located close to the Denver, Colorado area. But before we hop into chatting with Eleanor, I want to give a big shout out and thank you to all of the patrons over on Patreon. So thank you so much, Bonnie, Tool Mom Bonnie, Laura, Oakley Soap Company, Mary Lou, Made by Mary Lou, Amy, Bison Valley Carving, Dan and Kelly, Reclaimed Living Store, Brandy, Studio Obey, Kathy, One Girl and Her Tools, Ellen, Little Bear Furniture, and Ethan Carter Designs. Thank you all so very much. I appreciate your ongoing support of the podcast. And make sure you hang around to the end of the podcast so you can find out how you can also support the podcast. All right, with no further ado, here is Eleanor Dewey. Well, Eleanor, since I know that you've listened to the podcast before, you probably know that I have my guests introduce themselves. So I'm going to let you do that.
Yeah. I'm Eleanor Dewey, and I'm a woodworker and wood turner here in Denver, Colorado, aka the occupied lands of the Arapaho and Cheyenne, aka my hometown pretty much. I've been here since I was 7. So it's
okay. All right.
It's home to me. Yeah.
I've only ever seen the airport of Denver, Colorado. I've never actually been there.
Yeah, we're a flyover for a lot of people. But
yeah,
once COVID is over, you're very welcome to come out here. It's a beautiful place.
It is one place we were actually, my family, we're going to take a very safe family vacation, but we are going to leave our little, bubble here. Mm-hmm. Just because we have to. We're going absolutely bonkers. But one of the places we looked at was Colorado because we were like, well, if we stayed at a place in the middle of wilderness, there's nobody around, type thing, and it would at least change the scenery. But we're not allowed to come to Colorado, so we will not be coming to Colorado.
Sorry, I don't make the rules.
It's okay. It's okay. Iowa's one of those. It's no. Iowa's not allowed to go to Colorado.
That's real. Yeah, it's been one of those things that luckily we have a family cabin an hour and a half away in the mountains. We've been me and my spouse, we've been heading to the mountains, go camping and avoid the people and still get out of the chaos of the city and stuck at home situation.
Yeah, I truly wish we it's one of those things, vacation home has been on the list of something that we want for a very long time. And right now I really, really wish we had that already because it would be nice. But Airbnb is in a clinch, and as long as they're doing the CDC cleaning, we're good to go.
Right. Bring them Lysol wipes and you're good.
That's right. All right. Well, let's talk a bit about growing up. So you said you've been in there. Oh, you have Kitty as well.
He's loud too, so hopefully he doesn't enter and jump in too much.
Yes, it will be totally fine. But you said you've been in Colorado since you were 7. But what was it like growing up? What kind of things were you interested in? That kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm the baby of the family. I have two older brothers, and we grew up right outside of Denver. And thankfully, we kind of lived in the boonies of the suburbs where I could go out and walk into the prairie and be a kid and explore. And so I'm definitely a child of the prairie. I love going outside. That was kind of my safe haven when I was little. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I with like woodworking, my family is very much the attitude of if the house needs to get painted, we have three children and like the two of us, so we're gonna
Right.
paint it.
Right.
If we need new tile, we're gonna rip it up and make the kids lay the tile. If we have a basement that needs refinished, we're gonna like have the kids hauling drywall, which at the time I was not so excited about it, but now I'm really grateful.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really grateful for it because I grew up definitely having that attitude of like, yeah, you just learn how to do it and you fix it.
Right.
Um, and so I definitely had a lot of projects like that, just like playing outside in the garage with my dad's tools. And I was a little skateboard kid. I was a little skater girl. So
Mm-hmm.
I built some skateboard ramps and stuff like that. One of my birthdays, my dad gifted me. He was like, whatever skateboard like ramp you want to make, I'll make it. We can buy the lumber. Which was intense because I'm, of course, picked like the most extravagant,
Of
like
course you
ridiculous.
did.
Like,
Yeah.
man, it took a long ass time, and my dad, by the end of it, was like not happy about offering. Um, but yeah, so that was kind of my life as a kid, doing lots of work
Mm-hmm.
around the house on weekends while my friends got to go play video games and stuff. But now I know how to use tools.
That's right.
Um, my grandparents, they're the same way. They're super handy. Anytime we go, when I was a kid, spend summers in Utah at their little ranch.
Mm-hmm.
It was ranch tours all day, every day. That's what we do on holiday gatherings. Everyone chips in and we cut up a bunch of dead trees and stack firewood, and that's like our version of fun. So
Is that where your family's originally from? Utah?
yeah, both sides of my family, Utah for a long time. Got a lot of Mormons, a lot of ex-Mormons.
I was
My
gonna
family,
ask that.
yeah. Thankfully for me, my parents left the church when they were young. No judgment to any Mormons, but that's not my life. So
No, but I could see making, your how you identify who you are would be very difficult if you were growing up in the church. Um,
yeah, yeah. So I was like a young queer kid, a young trans woman in middle school, high school. It was hard enough being in the suburbs, and like
mhm.
however long it's been, over a decade, like times have really changed. It was hard for me in high school, growing up, and so I'm glad it wasn't harder, like being
Right.
in the church. Thankfully, my family, for Mormons, family is super important, and I think that kind of like family over everything.
Like that
So
trumps some of the, um,
yeah, yeah. So my
yeah.
grandma, who's like in her 80s, she didn't miss a beat when I came out to her as trans and as queer. She loves my spouse to death. She's the sweetest, supportive grandma I could ask for. My other grandparents, they're the same way.
That's
So
awesome. I mean, that really is. That's not a story I think that gets to be told very often. So,
yeah, yeah,
um,
for sure.
and I'll stick a pin in what you said about things are better now because I don't know if that is for sure the case, but and yeah, we can chat about that more in a bit. But um, so turning is primarily like what you do now, right? As far as woodworking um, is concerned.
Yeah, so I started going to school at Red Rocks Community College here in Denver. They have a really, really amazing woodworking program.
Mm-hmm.
And they kind of have like three schools, right? It's like the Lutheran program, which I don't touch. I'm like, I'm not interested in doing violins and guitars and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then they do furniture and wood turning. So, like a lot of people, I can kind of came into the intro class where you learn kind of all your basics. You make some simple projects, and one of it is like a turning demo. You turn a mallet,
Mm-hmm.
and I got hooked. I loved it. It's such a different type of like woodworking. You know, you're controlling the tool.
Mm-hmm.
You're taking one big chunk of log and totally transforming it just in like one machine, one step.
Right.
It's really satisfying. For a lot of woodworking, it's like a painfully long process, of course, which is its own kind of
Right,
satisfying, but
right.
there's just like something really beautiful about going outside, chainsawing a little log, putting it on the
Mm-hmm.
lathe, and a couple of hours later, you got something really
Oh,
beautiful.
I know. I went to a community college, Palomar Community College, which is in northern San Diego County in California. When we lived out there for a few years, and I did only take one turning class, and probably it's for me it's most memorable because during taking that class, like very shortly after the semester started, um, I successfully got pregnant with our oldest, which I know, which for me, our story, he was try number 10. So it was one of those,
Woo!
like, it was
Yeah.
really amazing. And then it was just like standing there trying to turn and dealing with like morning sickness was not like, that's the memory, one of the memories I have with that. But, but also like, I remember thinking to myself, like, now I get why people get hooked on this because it's like instant gratification. You are correct. There is no other, like, besides for me, like, power carving is second to like turning,
Mm-hmm.
where you can get to it, depending on the size of the project, can get to a finished product, like, for sure within a day and usually within a matter of like hours, and nothing else like that exists in woodworking. Like everything's, this long process, which, like you said, there's reward in that, absolutely, but not the same type of reward.
Yeah. Yeah. And for me, me and my spouse, we own our home, which I'm really thankful for, but we don't have a garage.
Mm-hmm.
So I converted one of our rooms into a wood shop, but it's small. It's like
Mm-hmm.
12 by 12, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so for wood turning, if you have a nice lathe and a bandsaw, a chainsaw, a drill press is nice,
Mm-hmm.
and your grinder, that's pretty much it. You're good. And so that appealed to me too, just in terms of like starting a small business, having your overhead low, not
Mm-hmm.
having to buy a ton of machines and have a ton of space and rent space or find some bench space um, to do your work. And so that was kind of also a draw for me, because I definitely love flat work, the flat earth world of woodworking. I'm
Mm-hmm.
all about it too. I really love furniture design um, and bent lamination, especially. It kind of brings the whole curves back into woodworking like turning
Mm-hmm.
does. And so ultimately, I would really love to do more of that work. And I'm kind of working right now with some friends who live about 3 hours south in the mountains. And they're just finishing up building a really giant wood shop that we're going to stick some really huge machines in, and is kind of the perfect place to do bigger pieces.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of my plan, is do smalls in Denver in my home studio, and then go down there for bigger projects.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's nice because, you know, when you're doing tables, when you're doing doors, when you're doing bigger cabinets and things like that, even if it's just to flip the tabletop over to sand, you really kind of need somebody there.
Right. Yeah.
And so there I have like two friends who are also into woodworking, and that makes it so we can kind of have our own little co-op and help
Mm-hmm.
each other out without having to like hire some extra hands and worry about them screwing something up. So um, yeah, that's kind of the next step for me.
Mm-hmm. Um, so you went, I mean, did you get the full like degree then through the community college? Like, is it in both furniture and turning?
Yeah, the way they have it, they have a bunch of like certificate programs.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have the advanced wood turning certificate. I took all those classes. Um, and then for furniture, um, there's kind of like beginner, intermediate, like
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what they're called, but
Right.
there's also like an associate's degree associated with it.
Yes.
And so I've been kind of going after that, and that makes it so that I can like take some furniture programs, take wood turning, take like CNC laser, bent lamination,
Mm-hmm.
some things that are like a little different than the normal furniture track.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I was about to finish. Was about to do chair making is like the Furniture
Mm-hmm.
3 program. And right in the middle of it, COVID decided to rear its ugly head and
Mm-hmm.
shut school down. It's not really possible to do chair
Right.
making online.
Right.
Um, so that was a big disappointment. I have like all my wood bought. We're to the point where we're just like, I built my full scale model. I'm ready to
Mm-hmm.
start. I have this dream of this beautiful chair. Um, and now I'm like, I don't know. We're supposed to start up in the fall, but it's kind of still up in the air of like how much shop time there's going to be. What's nice about that program is usually without a global pandemic, you have open shop
Right.
and access to the shop for 8 hours a
Mm-hmm.
day. And it's really amazing to just have bench space,
Mm-hmm.
machines, anything you can really ask for. Dominoes, multi-routers, all the
Right.
fancy stuff. And so without that, my chair has just been staying in my dreams and non-reality. So
Not really. I have
I have like a
a
couple more classes done to do,
right.
but those are kind of on hold.
Yeah. That
Yeah.
does really suck. I had so the program where I was taking the classes had a very similar program to what you're talking about, and pretty much almost all the same classes that you mentioned. Um, and I too, I was going to be taking bent lamination and advanced finishing, which I was excited for both. And my mom suffered a massive stroke, so we picked up and left California and moved back to Iowa, and it took it was not until after our youngest was born, a year after our youngest was born, that I got back into woodworking, because it was kind of like I got spoiled with that shop, the shop at the school, and having access to like planers and jointers that are things that cost like tens of thousands of dollars that I could never afford on my
Mhm.
own.
Yep.
Um, so it was one of those like, well, how can I work? I don't have the equipment, and it just became like a matter of like having to change my frame of mind to be like, I can still build what I want to build. It will probably take 10 times longer, but I can still do it with the few tools that I have. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, it always sucks when life comes in and interrupts that
Yeah,
dream.
absolutely. Yeah, you know, it's like you're blessed that you can go back and be with your mom, but at the same time, it's definitely hard when you can't finish out your goals. Everything takes a
right.
turn.
Right.
Yeah, and I think, learning out of school where you have access to so many machines, it's really valuable because of that reason, right? It's like you're
Right.
not normally going to have access to all these machines, and being able to learn on them, also figure out like what it is that you like to do, what tools you want to
Right.
use before you invest a bunch of money. But then
Mm-hmm.
at the same time, it does spoil you. Like
Yes.
I am like, now I have to be really creative. I got a 6-inch jointer. How the hell am I gonna like flatten this 12-inch wide board?
Yeah.
And that's definitely where like YouTube maker community comes in handy, because there's got to be somebody out there in their garage like coming up with some ingenious way to flatten a board without like busting out your hand planes for hours.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, so is this, is this your sole, like, this is what you do for work right now as well? Or do you have like additional work too?
Yeah. So, it is now, which is awesome. And that was kind of the goal when I started school a few years ago. I had been in nonprofit world for like the last 12 years, doing mostly working at LGBTQ organization, doing survivor support and youth organizing, which I love and is awesome work. That's where I met like my spouse and from her organization, and that's where I met a lot of my friends, and that's definitely where my heart is still. But it's also just taxing work.
Yes.
And I really burnt out. I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it anymore. I realized I wasn't the community organizer, the advocate, the supporter that people needed and deserved. I needed to scale back and take some time to like work on myself. I think a lot of times we think about self-care and taking care of ourselves as selfish work. But it's really selfless, because if you're not able to be your full self and strong and healthy, then you're not really able to help anybody.
Right.
You're just kind of kidding yourself.
Yeah.
And so I got just a admin job at a health foundation doing pushing paper, and started going to school at night. And then I just got to a point where I was like, I can't do it. I can't work in this office job anymore. And luckily my spouse, she's got a full-time job, and so she's bringing home the bacon, and is allowing me, the freedom to be able to go into school and go into woodworking full-time, and kind of launch my business. So I'm nowhere near profitable yet. Hoping that
Amen to
changes
that.
soon. Yeah. So less supportive spouses,
Exactly.
for making the dream a reality with a steady income.
That's right.
But I'm gonna make it work. I'm like, someday I'm gonna pass you.
That's
I'm gonna
right.
be bringing in big bucks. So we'll see.
That's a frequent conversation around my household. But yes, thank goodness for supportive partners that allow us to kind of go after our dream. But I think it also speaks to like what you said, like, because I've had these conversations. I would not be as nice of a partner or mother if I don't get to do some baking. And COVID has really proved that out, because there was a solid, at least 2 months where I didn't make anything. One in part because both kids were home, and I was, they took up the entire day type thing, as they should. And two, because just as COVID hit, I I had a small injury in the shop that I had to allow time to heal. So it was like it all compounded onto each other, but it was like 2 months of not making. And by the end of that, I was like not a pleasant person to be around. So
Yep, I get that.
it's like you have to let me make, otherwise I just don't function well. So I totally understand that. I have thought many a times, and I've talked with many people on the podcast, how making is essentially therapy in so many ways. And it's a practice of mindfulness in and of itself, because you have to be ever present while you are working. Um, and so there's, so many people out there that have traumatic life experiences that woodworking really does help them work through. And it is a dream and passion of mine of, one day forming a space that makes making available and affordable, specifically to people in marginalized communities like LGBTQ, people of color, women, and how all of those communities intersect with each other as well. Because I strongly believe in the power of working with your hands to help in so many ways, your mind and spirit. So I guess I would ask, like, especially with your history of, your nonprofit work, like, do you see that intersection of that work with, the making work that you're doing now?
Yeah, for sure. I can't help it. My
Yeah.
organizer brain is still always on. And part of it, going into the work is the reality is that a lot of our customers and the people that you're going to be making a living on is like kind of making furniture for the 1%.
Right.
It's really, and so I kind of struggled with that at first of just thinking about, how do I hold my values and this work, knowing that I'm going to be, having to make furniture that's really not accessible to most people in the world. And I really kind of realized that that's not the work. It's not like figuring out how to make my stuff extremely cheap. It's about bringing people into this industry. And so I have a similar dream of starting a cooperative, starting some kind of shop that makes it possible for young people of color, young LGBTQ folks, people who aren't in woodworking. Going from being in an LGBTQ social justice organization to being in the shop, it really was like a kind of culture shock, just in terms of like, I was really in a bubble. Most of the people in my life are queer or trans. Most people are people of color. And so to then be back in a world where it's like almost all white straight men, was definitely interesting.
All right, I'm super excited for this week's sponsor. This week's sponsor is Tool Mom Bonnie, or Tool Mom and Company. So Tool Mom and Company is for all ages, genders. They have what you need for your one-stop tool-related merchandise of gifts or clothing or both. Her products are fun, fashionable, one of a kind. And you can check her out at www.toolmomstore.com, or find her on Instagram under Tool Mom Bonnie, and Bonnie's Bonnie. You can receive an extra 20% off at checkout by using the coupon code MakerMom. So I have 2 of her mugs. I have one that says, I believe, what is it? Oh my gosh. One is like the definition of a tool woman, and the other one is just like a circular saw with flames coming off of it, and I believe it says Go Girl on it, and they're super fun mugs. I love drinking coffee out of them in the morning. If it's not out of my Wonder Woman mug, it is out of one of those two mugs. So you definitely should at least check out the mugs, if nothing else. And remember, extra 20% off at checkout by using the code MakerMom. All right, thank you to Mom Bonnie, and let's get back to the episode.
And, you know, for the most part, I've had like a really positive experience at the school. But what I think really is glaring and like lacking is like any kind of proactive approach to diversifying the industry. That, you know, you have like supportive men, supportive white people who want to see more women, more queer folks, more people of color in the shop, in the industry, but don't know where to start, are too afraid to start, and don't have like the infrastructure set up to make it happen.
Right.
And so that's kind of where I'm like, I do have some of that experience and knowledge working in nonprofits. And so, you know, step one was like, I gotta learn this stuff on my own. And like, I am that demographic. I need to just like pay attention to myself and make sure I feel comfortable and good.
Right.
And when I'm in like a place, being able to kind of proactively organize to get more people in the woodworking program at Red Rocks, like starting some kind of co-op or support network in Denver and Colorado, bringing young people in the shop. Because the reality is that it's like, it's a struggle for sure. It's not an accounting job where you can like make big bucks right away, pretty much anywhere, but it is a viable career. And I think part of what attracted me to find woodworking is the fact that like you can do a lot of it on your own, or in a small shop. And the reality with like construction and carpentry, electricians, plumbing, those kinds of trades, you're usually working on a big crew. And it's hard when you're the one other, when you're the one woman, the one trans person, the one queer person, the one person of color, the one outside of the norm. And so what kind of drew me to find woodworking is the actual craft of it. I love that. But it also is something that is really ripe to have a change in who is doing it. And I think you see that with like, you know, more DIYers, like content creator, kind of Instagram makers and people. But still they don't really have a lot of access to the like real deal fine woodworking programs. And so, you know, I would love to like go out and visit Baltimore, a workshop of our own. I've been kind of like seeing what they're doing out there, and it seems really awesome. And part of me is just like trying to find other like-minded women and queer folks and people out there who are trying to be proactive and do that work and learn together and try to make it happen. So, and you know, woodworking, it also provides me like a mental state that I can then at night go and volunteer. Like I have the emotional capacity where I'm like not just done at the end of the day, and I have the energy to go organize, go be a volunteer again, not just be gay for pay, not just be a paid organizer. So I've been taking advantage of that, of like my spouse, she still works in organizing world, LGBTQ youth, youth of color work. So I help him out in doing that stuff. So yeah.
That's awesome. And I would say you came to the right place. I feel like if I say it on enough podcasts, it's going to happen.
Right?
that a group of us are going to get together and by us, I probably predominantly mean queer women. That seems to be the ones popping up to be like, we need this, and we do need this.
Yeah. And at Red Rocks in the program, there are more and more women coming into the program. And the way we roll as queer women, most of those women are queer. I would say maybe 50-50.
Yeah.
I would say probably a little more than 50-50.
Right.
So that's always like, it's nice that, usually I'm not the only woman in a class, and usually that other woman is a queer woman. And there are some other trans men, trans masculine folks in the program or who have come through it. And so we're around,
That's
we're
right.
here.
But I would
So
say,
it's just about mobilizing.
I would say, and feel free to tell me like that something is off the table to chat about. But I don't get this opportunity very often because I've had queer women on as guests of the podcast, but I have not had any trans queer women on as part of the podcast. So thank you very much for agreeing to be on the podcast. But I would say that even if there are queer women who are going through that program and in a class with you, that does not always equal safe space for you still. Because unfortunately, queer women still can hold prejudices just like anybody else. And there seems to be a divide, why I don't understand, but there seems to be a divide within the LGBTQ community along several, it's like we all want to take those letters and then do a full stop after each letter instead of understanding like we are such a small fucking group to begin with. Why do we need to battle within each other? I will never understand that. But I think it is worth pointing out that for you, like that doesn't always mean still a safe space. And I think what you were talking about when you're saying you were drawn to the craft because you could work alone, what I hear, what pulls at my heartstrings is because I feel the same way, that means it's a safe space. If I am by myself, I am safe with myself. I am not always safe if I include other people in that space.
Yeah, totally. I think like my experience personally in the program with other queer women who are cisgender has been mostly positive. And I hate to say it, like it's not always about age, but a lot of times I think
is.
that
there's a lot of that. Yeah.
That, I feel like thankfully through a lot of work and a lot of struggle over decades and decades that trans women are being a lot more embraced, trans men are being a lot more embraced by the LGBT community. And I think a lot of the second wave feminist ideals that like had weird backwards views around trans women are starting to get a little stale and old for a younger generation. But it's like anything where when you're at the intersection of a lot of identities, it gets hard. My experience being in the program, I think a huge part of it is that I am white, and that being a trans woman in the space is hard, but being like a Black trans woman in that space, being a trans woman of color in that space, it's going to be like such a different world, such a different experience. And
were there many people, were there any people of color in your program?
Yeah, but not enough at all. It's still very, very white, very white. And I feel like, my experience there was, I definitely experienced more kind of traditional sexism than transphobia. I am out, but I'm not like, I don't know. I don't know how people read me, but a lot of people just read me as a cis girl. Some people read me as a trans woman. I don't really know, but I definitely experienced that kind of sexism a lot more, of just like, oh, like, let me explain to you how to use this tool.
Mansplaining is the best, right?
Oh, do you need a hand with that? Let me like carry this for you. Which sometimes I'm like, all right, go ahead, like carry it. That's fine. Right. But I think the other thing is that I definitely felt like racism was a bigger issue. I mean, they're all issues. It's not about like oppression Olympics.
Right.
But racism is a huge issue in that shop, in probably every woodworking program in this country, in every school. And I mean, it is across the board in everything. Mm-hmm. Systemic racism is a thing, but it's very glaring in the woodworking community. Yeah. And just who has access, who is safe. And so, you know, I think for me, it's so much of creating safe spaces for LGBTQ folks is really prioritizing and centering LGBTQ folks of color in that process too. Yeah. Because however hard it is just to be a straight woman in the industry, it's like so much harder to be a woman of color. And, you know, I'm grateful that there are the people like women of color in mm-hmm. the work and in my school, because God knows they like put up with a lot. And so I have been really grateful for the few folks that I've connected with. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. I think one thing I want to pick up on when you were talking about like it's not always an age or a generation thing. I think that goes for people of color in the woodworking community as well. Like I feel like the younger generation of makers that are coming up definitely don't feel threatened or don't see it as anything different if somebody, you know, a person of color is in the craft. Like it's not seen as like, oh, that's a weird thing or anything like that. I'm not sure how I'm trying to say this, but it's not seen as poorly maybe than some of the older generations. But to your point, it is very different, the world of like the DIY maker community versus like the fine woodworking community. And I think that is because even with social media, there still very much is a system in place and gatekeepers in place mm-hmm. To that community, right? There's the gatekeepers for printed stories, as far as like publications, as far as books, as far as magazines. And that's still very much, even in this day and age, how we get our information from the fine woodworking community.
Yeah.
You know, even though like the magazines have Instagram, they're not posting like representative stuff. They're not accepting articles very much from representative people. They're very much still being like the gatekeepers. And I think until you can overthrow the patriarchal system that is in place to find woodworking, yep, it's going to be difficult to see that change without us creating our own system and basically making them be irrelevant by creating our own system.
Yeah. And, you know, I think, and part of the gatekeeping, it's like at schools, right? You know, I think just seeing like the Krenov school posted something during the uprisings last month around Black Lives Matter and recognizing that they need to do better and work harder mm-hmm. institutionally to bring in
right.
woodworkers of color and women and other marginalized communities, but especially Black folks. And, you know, it's just like the amount of pushback that you see in these comments from
Well,
people
you
is,
know why
it's
that got
expected.
put out
And
by Krenoff, right? You know why that got put off. That's because
yeah, of
Laura
course.
Mays is it.
And that's a, yeah, like Laura Mays being a queer woman is
Right,
like a huge example of why leadership matters.
right.
And why different types of leadership is really important. And, you know, I think extending from that is, after going through this program at Red Rocks, I've been, you know, I initially started trying to find jobs in shops,
Yep.
custom shops in woodworking. Um, and, you know, in that world, it's hard to know. It's hard to know, did I not get a call back because I'm a woman or trans? Did I not get a call back because I just don't have enough shop experience? What the reason is, but God knows it's been difficult for me to get even interviews at these places. And, you know, recently I had like 2 interviews, went into the shop. It seemed like a great fit, and then never got a call back at all.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, what's unfortunate is that, like, us marginalized folks, whatever identity it is, just the fact that we have to wonder why
Right,
is the struggle.
right.
And um and so that's why, definitely my dream is like run a successful business, and part of running that successful business is like being a space to then hire on people who won't necessarily get even called back from other places, being a place where I
Yes.
can like have apprenticeships, you know, support other woodworkers, who aren't straight white men.
Yep.
So here's to
Yeah.
us being so successful that we get to make all these dreams come true, all these like beautiful
Uh,
shops, because,
I mean,
you
I'm
know.
with you. It took me a while to get to a point to understand that it's almost my responsibility to become
Mhm.
successful enough so that I can hire only members of the LGBTQ community with uh, uh, focus on those of color.
Mhm.
That is my goal, and that is because I want to. I, in order to be the change, I have to become successful. Um, and to become successful, though, I will also not stand for my values. I'm not going to
Yeah.
stand there and say, I don't believe this just to become successful so I can do this thing over here. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, and I
yeah.
really appreciate that about you and your presence on social media and podcasting, because I think that what I am afraid is happening with a lot of makers and people who are especially trying to get more content creation recognition is, if you are like queer or you are a woman, you have whatever, um, beliefs about racial justice, that you're not speaking up on it because you're afraid to lose followers. You
Yep.
know, that people are so after getting likes and getting clients that, that we forget that like it is our responsibility.
It is our
And
responsibility. Yep.
for everyone that experiences some kind of oppression, you also experience some kind of privilege. And so whether it's like us as white folks still saying, you know, like, this is important, racism is real, Breonna Taylor's killers are still free,
Right.
that we do that. And the reality is, like, we're not risking a lot, you know, like the
Mm-mm.
risk for me as a white woman saying that Black Lives Matter is like, okay, maybe some people unfollow me, like,
Right.
big deal.
Right.
You know, like maybe then somebody who is a prospective client sees that and doesn't hire me. But do I want to work with them in the first place? Like, no. And the reality is that it's like, then you do have somebody who does see that and appreciates it, that it
Mm-hmm.
makes a big difference. You know, like being a woodworker, getting new to the industry, it brings me a lot of joy and confidence to see other women do this, to see other queer people do it. And so the impact is, even if it's just a little, it's all collective. It's all pushing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I
this
mean,
forward.
I'm with you. I mean, I'm not gonna lie because I'm not perfect. I took a moment of pause before I spoke. But my concern was not about losing followers. My concern was about doing right by my friends of color. I did
Mhm.
not want to do something that negatively impacted them. That is who I was thinking of before I, in that moment of pause and finding the words. I
Yeah.
just, it took time for me to process and find any kind of words whatsoever. But it has brought me to be adamant about things like calling out some of my white friends who
Hmm.
have a bigger platform than me on these things and saying, I didn't see you post anything. And as your friend, I'm telling you, it's your responsibility because I know you care about these other people of color in our community. You're friends with them as well. It's your responsibility to use your platform for good and pushing them. Some listened and some didn't. That's their choice, but it's my job to push. It's also my job to, whenever I get something, whether it's speaking engagement, whether it's product from a brand, I have already started pushing and saying, thank you for the opportunity. However, I can't take it unless you're going to also give this same opportunity to a person of color. And here's a list of people that I know would fit your brand, and being able to say, here's who's available for that to fit your
Hmm.
brand and to also meet this requirement that I have. And I'm small potatoes. So it's going to mean that I probably lose stuff, and I'm okay with
Yeah.
that because guess what, I'm not successful yet anyways, and I don't want to get to be successful knowing that I didn't do everything I could do the entire way up, because
Yeah.
we don't change things unless we start with ourselves. And so
Yeah.
I
For
think
sure.
that's needed, all 100,010%.
Yeah. I'm here with you. And I think part of it is like, we don't all have to be out in the streets every day. We don't all have to be doing this work for full-time paid
Right.
work like myself, but there are ways that we all have an impact, and collectively we things do change, and
Yep.
it's like that duality. Things are getting worse and things are getting better at the same time.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, here we go. I
That's right.
appreciate you, you know, using your little small potatoes
My
platform, because
small
it's going to be
potatoes
big
platform.
potatoes pretty soon.
My small potatoes platform. I'm okay with that. Really, I am. Well, Eleanor, I appreciate you letting me throw out words like patriarchal system and and to talk about race and such with me. Uh, and I appreciate you taking that risk on yourself as well, because I understand what safe space is and what safe space is not. So I do dearly appreciate you being willing to chat with me and keep it real on the podcast episode. But I
Yeah.
want to make sure that you get a chance to shout out how everyone can follow along with you and see all your awesome turnings and see how you like apologize for killing the bugs that destroy your pieces, unlike me.
Yeah, poor little bugs. Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me on. This was like really fun, and I'm sure this will continue, this relationship, supporting each other, shouting each other
Mm-hmm.
out. Starting a business, I've been trying to be better about social media and posting. So people can find me at Eleanor Modern Woodworks on Instagram. Um, and I'm sure you'll share that because
Yep.
people spell Eleanor like a million different ways. But if you want to see me, you'll find me.
That's right.
I'm around. Yeah, and so I'll be posting more of my little adventures in my wood shop, and pretty soon launching a website where people can buy some bowls, some wood turn stuff, and hopefully once we get this big shop going, you'll see some bigger furniture pieces as well.
Yeah, I'm excited to see you get to work in that space. Though I do like the bowls you turn. I appreciate the appreciation of turning. It will never be me, but I appreciate the appreciation of turning.
Yeah. Well, if you ever want to rewrite your like traumatic experience, having morning sickness, turning, sounds very dizzying and uncomfortable. We can do that sometime when things are calmer, hopefully.
Yes.
Soon.
Yes. But I also have fun stories, like, feeling the first flutters while at flutters of baby inside while at a lathe. So things like that are also fun. It's not all about morning sickness, but yes. So yeah, thanks so much.
Yeah.
All right, so again, that was Eleanor Dewey, who's a wood turner in Denver, Colorado. Thanks so much for checking out the interview with her. I really enjoyed my time chatting with her. If you enjoy this podcast, which now has 2 weekly episodes, one on Wednesday, which is the Wonder Women segment, it includes interviews with female and non-binary makers of all sorts. And then the Friday episode is an interview with a fellow maker mom, and that maker can be a maker of any kind: woodworker, metalworker, jewelry maker, any kind of maker. So make sure you check that out. If you really are enjoying the podcast and want to help support it, there's one really quick, easy way that you can do that, and that is to make sure that you hit subscribe wherever you are listening to or watching this podcast on. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Then if you can head over to iTunes or on YouTube and leave either a comment or a 5-star review, that really helps with the algorithm and for more people to find the podcast and learn about all of these amazing female makers. All right, so that's the quickest, easiest way. It doesn't cost you anything, and it really does help out, and I really do appreciate it. Now, if you're a super fan of the podcast and you want to do some sort of ongoing support of it, please go ahead and check out Patreon. That's patreon.com/MakerMomPodcast. There's a few different tier levels over there that you can check out: a $1, $3, $5 tier level, and then a $30 a month tier level, which makes you an official sponsor of the podcast. And last but not least, there's always merchandise you can purchase as well. And just head on over to my personal designer and maker website, freemanfurnishings.com/shop, and you can buy a Maker Mom podcast tee. All right, until next week, I will see you later.